The clips you just saw have been spreading shock all over the world, and these are current events that are occurring in Gaza and Jerusalem and Palestine. But why are you shocked? Why is this shocking? This has been happening for years, but let's understand how it started. In the late 1800s, Zionist groups began settling in Palestine, buying land and growing in groups from time to time in response to the anti-Semitism growing in Europe. This very slow influx of Jewish migrants peaked during and after World War II, leading to the day of May 14, 1948, the declaration of the State of Israel and the Palestinian Nakba. More on that later. The next major event occurs almost 20 years after the declaration of Israel, and it was known as the Six-Day War, which began on the 6th of June 1967, where Israel illegally expanded its land, conquering Jerusalem, the West Bank, Golan Heights in Syria, and the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula. After 20 years, fast forward, the Palestinian population in the occupied territories, continuously suffering from oppression, took to the streets across the occupied Palestinian territory, starting from the 9th of October 1987 for 6 years leading to the Oslo Accords, and again in September 2000 till end of 2005. The death toll of these two uprisings neared 5,000 Palestinian lives. Keep in mind, these are only the major events, not considering the hundreds if not thousands of lives lost yearly due to this oppression by the Israeli forces. As you can see, it's not a new occurrence, the oppression and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. This has been happening for over 70 years, and these actions have led to countless UN resolutions to protect the Palestinians being overlooked, disregarded by Israel, or vetoed to protect Israel and encourage its impunity. Like Malala Yousufzai, who stood for women's rights to education in Pakistan, and Greta Thunberg, who called for action against climate change, this is my call to action, as this issue requires young people like you and me to stand up for the rights of the Palestinian people, who have been and still are living in horrendous situations under the longest ongoing occupation. I hope to shed a light on this critical issue that has much to uncover. The main current issue that's occurring in Sheikh Jarah is the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and the illegal expansion of Israel. The Israeli government has received 21 condemnations based around the treatment of Palestinians and the illegal land expansion, the country with the most condemnations last year. In 1947, the UN proposed a partition plan splitting British-mandated Palestine between the indigenous population and Zionist migrants that arrived in the previous few decades. Israel accepted the partition plan that was heavily opposed by the Palestinians and the Arab neighboring states. Nevertheless, this partition plan passed, and the period leading up to the 1948 Nakba and following it signaled the start of the ethnic cleansing of the indigenous Palestinians. And this ended up with around 13,000 Palestinians killed, more than 700,000 Palestinians fled out or forced out from their villages and homes, more than 400 villages destroyed, and countless others repopulated by Israeli Zionists. From that date onward, under different pretexts, Israeli expansion continued. The next episode as mentioned before was 1967. Land grab, ethnic cleansing, oppression, all are multiple facets of the same issue. The Al-Aqsa Mosque attacks and the brutality the Palestinians face in East Jerusalem protests are very clear examples of this, but this has been happening ever since 1948. Another indicator of this same issue is the Palestinian death toll since 2000. A total of 9,849 Palestinians have been killed by the IDF, 2,113 of them being children. This is not including the thousands of arrests that they have done, 4,184 in 2020 alone, with numerous arrests made up under bogus claims like throwing rocks or blasting music, or as simple as kids riding bikes with Palestinian flags attached to them. How do we expect this issue to stop if this is the mindset of a previous IDF soldier?
לא הייתי יורה באופן היפותטי. היפותטי לא הייתי יורה בילד. בכלל לא, אין מצב כזה. אני הייתי יורה לו בראש על מנת להרוג. על ילד בן 8? כן, אם הוא זרק עליי אבן, הייתי יורה לו בראש על מנת להרוג. עוד שאלות?
In the eyes of the Israeli polity, there are no inhumane actions, as at their disposal there is a large playbook of false claims they live by. The first I would like to quickly debunk is the excuse that this is the Israelis' land from over 3,000 years ago and that this land is rightfully theirs. Because like many other civilizations, they have lived there. Imagine, does this justify massacres like Deir Yassin? How could this logic be accepted while expelled Palestinians from 70 years ago aren't allowed to return to their land? This interview conducted by Vice News shows a perfect example of the oppression and ethnic cleansing in Sheikh Jarah, showing the point of view of a Palestinian family expelled and an American Israeli Zionist defending his logic.
So your position here is a political position to keep Palestinians out of it?
Not to keep Palestinians out of it, to keep Jews in it.
And therefore keep the Palestinians who were here out of it?
No, that's not, no.
رمونا بين ساعة والتانية للشارع، كسروا الابواب، ضربونا احنا واولادنا ونسواننا، حملونا بالقوة ورمونا برا.
They're not coming back into this house ever. I understand why they're angry at me, I understand why they dislike me, but I did not do this to them, I'm not doing this to them, and as I said, if I leave, I'll be replaced immediately, and I venture to think that whoever comes here is not going to be as easygoing as I am.
How has this been accepted for decades? Do you find it fair that if children threw rocks at the occupying forces, it's a criminal offense? Do you find it fair that if a country with no army has to defend itself against a country with one of the most powerful armies in the world? Is it fair that just because someone was born Palestinian, they live in constant fear and oppression? This is not the first time an issue of this scale has occurred, and if there is no international involvement, it definitely won't be the last. They say they urge Israel to stop eviction in Sheikh Jarrah. They say they condemn all the violence occurring. Well, I say actions speak louder than words, and all that's happening right now is words. From this short documentary, I hope you learned that there is much more occurring in Palestine than what you see on the news. But at least with this targeted social media involvement, a sign of hope for a free and independent Palestinian state is possible. Thank you for listening.